They came without warning. 1,000 ships pierced the silence of Earth's orbit, casting shadows over continents. They weren't emissaries. They didn't offer terms. The Galactic Empire, vast and ancient, saw Earth not as a culture to study or a threat to fear, but as a resource to consume. Their language had no word for mercy, only compliance or extinction. The defense grid barely had time to power up. Orbital satellites blinked red before being torn apart by energy lances. Military installations vanished in pinpoint strikes. Cities crumbled under kinetic bombardments that moved faster than sound. By the time Earth's leaders understood what was happening, a quarter of the planet was ash. It was never a war. It was a purge. What they didn't destroy, they harvested. Millions were taken, their purposes unknown. Resistance forces rallied, but they were fractured, regional, obsolete. Fighter jets launched with fury and fell within minutes. Nuclear retaliation was attempted, intercepted before ignition. The last standing fleet, the pride of humanity, was vaporized in low orbit before ever engaging. The Empire had done this countless times before. This was routine. The Empire's records would later mark the event with one word: pacified. In truth, the world bled. The great towers of human achievement became dust. Beijing, New York, Mumbai, Cairo, Berlin, gone. Humanity's history smoldered and libraries turned to cinders. No negotiation. No demands. Not even recognition. Just erasure. Yet not all died. A few escaped in chaos. Old lunar habitats were activated by rogue technicians. Mining colonies in the asteroid belt that once teetered on bankruptcy became sanctuaries. Unregulated research stations on Mars and Europa were abandoned by oversight but not by the desperate. They took in whoever could reach them: engineers, hackers, veterans, scientists, farmers. They weren't chosen. They survived. Communication was impossible. The Empire jammed every frequency within Earth's influence radius. Ships trying to flee were either ignored or shot down without pause. No appeals for clemency, no audience with imperial dignitaries. The concept of diplomacy was irrelevant to conquerors of galaxies. Still, the survivors endured. They shared fragmented intelligence. The Empire wasn't a myth, it was a machine. Ancient and absolute. It consumed systems and streamlined populations. Species that resisted were either wiped out or broken into servitude. Earth had been categorized as volatile. Their response had been decisive. But humanity was not extinct. Not yet. The ones who escaped carried more than memory. They carried fury. And that fury smoldered, not in rage but in resolve. No more debates about borders. No more arguments about flags or creeds. They were one thing now, the remnant of a species betrayed by the universe's silence. And they would remember. For years, nothing came. The Empire moved on, its attention drifting elsewhere. Their scans registered Earth as inert, its orbital activity dead. They didn't look for stragglers. They didn't monitor the belt. Why would they? Humanity had been evaluated, tested, and discarded. But the survivors were not idle. They recorded the attack. They archived every signal fragment. Every energy reading, every debris field, every moment. They catalogued the tactics, the weapons, the weaknesses. Loss taught them. The destruction taught them. They studied not to grieve, but to prepare. The Empire had expected chaos. Panic. Collapse. They had not expected unity. They had not expected that, from ruin, a purpose would rise. The ones on Europa learned how to live in silence. The Martian stations developed communications that used neutrino pulses, undetectable by standard Empire sweeps. Old AI cores were reignited and tasked with one function: survival optimization. Humanity shrank from billions to thousands, but those thousands were fanatics in the purest form. Not driven by religion or politics, but by extinction. And what it meant to never let it happen again. They stopped calling themselves colonies. They were cells. Purpose-driven units of persistence. The cry of Earth was their genesis. The silence afterward was their creed. Children were raised not with lullabies but with lectures on orbital mechanics and combat theory. Farmers learned coding. Poets learned explosives. Everyone became something more. Education was a weapon. Memory was a map. And always, deep in their collective mind, the moment replayed, when the sky broke and the world burned. No one knew exactly when the Empire would notice again. But they all agreed on one certainty: when it did, it would not find sheep waiting. It would find wolves. Sharpened. Waiting in the dark. In the void beyond the Empire's reach, humanity became something else. The survivors, scattered across moons and asteroids, no longer clung to the memory of nations or flags. The identity of Earthling faded, replaced by one unifying truth: they were the species the galaxy had tried to erase. And they would never allow it again. The coalition of Phoenix wasn't formed with ceremony. It wasn't signed into existence. It emerged from necessity. Cells of survivors began communicating through encrypted neutrino bursts and quantum tunnels, linking the outposts that had once acted in isolation. Each node contributed what it could: supplies, data, code, tools. The coalition had no capital, no parliament, no diplomats. Only goals. They began with foundations. Power, air, gravity, no longer taken for granted. Every cubic meter of livable space was a fight against entropy. They recycled down to the molecule, repurposed scrap into housing, turned mining lasers into forged tools. They built because they had no other option. The vacuum was unforgiving, and there would be no second chances. Within years, the outposts shifted from survival to design. Engineers fused human intuition with AI optimization. Systems once considered theoretical became field-tested tools. Energy generation was decentralized. Shielding and hull alloys were adapted from both captured alien wreckage and Earth's last databanks. Time was measured not in days, but in breakthroughs. Education was transformed. Every child became a project. Memory implants accelerated learning. Nanofabrication training began before adolescence. Physical conditioning was standardized. From the youngest to the oldest, everyone had a defined path: scientist, soldier, operator, mechanic. The arts didn't vanish, but they changed. Songs became codes. Stories were simulations. Philosophy was survival strategy. Artificial intelligences, once shackled by ethical constraints, were activated and liberated. These were not caretakers, but architects, strategists without emotion, designed to process chaos and deliver control. Each major habitat partnered with an AI unit, codenamed Valkyries, that evolved independently, guided only by the mandate: enable humanity's future dominance. The cells shared everything. Successes were uploaded to the network instantly. Failures were dissected in virtual forums. Resources were pooled. Duplicates were minimized. Redundancy was sacred. Each station specialized. One focused on propulsion, another on targeting systems, others on stealth, encryption, exobiology, xenolinguistics. The coalition was not a single empire. It was a distributed superorganism, adapting faster than any centralized power ever could. They mapped the empire's technology meticulously. Bits of damaged drones, intercepted comms, fragments of ships. The coalition reverse-engineered every piece. Their scientists didn't care about tradition. They violated every protocol, broke every former taboo. Genetic engineering wasn't feared. It was embraced. Human bodies became stronger, minds quicker, immune systems enhanced to resist alien pathogens. Recruits volunteered for neural splicing. Cybernetic integration became a rite of passage. Memory recording ensured no skill was ever lost. Death was not defeat, it was data. The earliest prototypes of human warcraft emerged from asteroid foundries. Ugly, angular, brutal. No paint, no insignias. Built purely for function, long range, high speed, undetectable. They could hide in the shadow of a comet, drift silently for months, and deliver precision strikes with mathematically exact timing. There were no speeches, no flags. Just targets and results. What drove them wasn't hatred. Hatred burns too fast. This was purpose. Controlled, logical, absolute. They did not seek peace. Peace required trust. Trust had been burned with Earth's soil. The first generation born after the fall didn't speak of Earth with nostalgia. They spoke of it as a lost anchor, a reminder of what must never be allowed again. Their loyalties weren't to landscapes or cities, but to the mission. Their identities were molded from discipline, not sentiment. Internal conflict didn't exist. Disagreement was permitted only as algorithmic improvement. Every action was weighed by contribution to strategic survival. Leadership was distributed. Decisions were voted in milliseconds by linked minds and validated by AI prediction models. Time passed. The Empire did not return. It had moved on, blind to the kindling it had left behind. A tactical oversight. One that would cost them everything. As the coalition matured, simulations shifted. No longer focused on escape or camouflage, they began preparing for return. Projections, war-gamed thousands of ways, all converged on a simple truth: a direct confrontation would come. And humanity would not engage as victims. Their doctrine was born from that truth: don't match the enemy, outpace them. Don't plead for recognition, force it. Don't rebuild the past, forge a future that leaves the past in ruins. Across void cities and deep core labs, one phrase spread silently, encoded in firmware, etched into steel bulkheads, and whispered between generations. Never again submissive. Never again surprised. Never again alone. The attack on Outpost 9A13 lasted only 4 minutes. An isolated listening station near the Empire's trade corridor, manned by a minimal crew, protected by automated drones. It vanished without sending a distress signal. Debris analysis later showed quantum disruption and hypervelocity impacts. The Empire logged it as a spatial anomaly. No investigation followed. Days later, a cargo convoy went silent between star lanes. Wreckage recovered indicated surgical precision, cargo intact, crew incapacitated, navigation cores missing. Still, no real concern. Pirates, perhaps. A blip on the charts. Then the pattern escalated. Over 30 small-scale Empire installations were hit within 6 months. Communication hubs, fuel depots, patrol vessels. Every target chosen for its vulnerability, each strike executed with ruthless accuracy. There were never survivors. No calm chatter. No traceable emissions. No patterns the Empire's analysts could predict. But to the Coalition, it was exactly according to plan. The first strike doctrine had been enacted, a framework built not on overwhelming power, but on unpredictability and surgical dominance. The objective wasn't to cripple the Empire. Not yet. It was to instill uncertainty. To blur the lines between accident and intent, misfortune and design. The Empire needed to feel the presence of something it couldn't quantify. Coalition operatives, genetically and cybernetically enhanced, carried out the operations in silence. No transmissions, no signatures, no rescue protocols. Their lives were currency, spent wisely. Each mission, whether completed or lost, delivered valuable data. What the Empire failed to learn, the Coalition recorded in detail. Technology developed in deep isolation now saw field application. Hulls laced with gravity-dampening polymers. Energy weapons disguised as anomalies. Propulsion that mimicked comet trails. The ships were not piloted. They were extensions of their operators, interfaced directly through neural mesh. No warnings were issued. No manifestos broadcast. That was intentional. The Empire, accustomed to open rebellion, sought meaning in defiance. The Coalition gave them none. Just silence and destruction. Empire Command began redirecting patrol units. Resources were allocated to sensor recalibration. Security fleets were pulled from distant systems to protect core routes. This redistribution, subtle as it seemed, strained their logistics. Supply chains slowed. Maintenance delays spread. Small inefficiencies multiplied. The Empire didn't realize it was bleeding, only that something was wrong. The Coalition watched. Each response from the Empire was catalogued, stress-tested in simulators, adapted into countermeasures. By the time the third wave of attacks commenced, every action served dual purposes: tactical disruption and data extraction. Understanding the enemy was not a phase, it was the operation. The Valkyrie AIs reviewed billions of patterns per second. They discovered habits, blind spots, response times. The Empire's systems, built on rigidity and scale, could not pivot fast enough. Their doctrine demanded overwhelming retaliation, but there was nothing to retaliate against. The targets vanished. The culprits remained unidentified. Only the wreckage remained. Coalition strikes escalated in complexity. Dual-prong incursions, bait and fracture tactics, false trail deployments. They began disabling relays just long enough to manipulate internal communications, sending distorted commands between units. Mistrust grew. The Empire began suspecting internal sabotage. In response, the coalition moved deeper. Attacks were staged near larger stations, often under surveillance, just to test response latency. They left evidence deliberately, patterns just subtle enough to suggest intention, but never identity. It wasn't just about impact. It was psychological warfare at scale. The Empire's analysts convened. Patterns emerged, but the conclusions clashed. Some blamed insurgent factions, others claimed an unknown alien race. The suggestion that humanity had returned was dismissed outright. According to all records, they no longer posed a threat. Their extinction had been certified. While the Empire debated, the coalition advanced. No longer confined to hiding, they began asserting presence. Hidden beacons pulsed in deep space, relaying encrypted command paths. Carrier vessels, larger, faster, more lethal, were deployed in dormant star systems. They weren't staging for attack. They were conducting dress rehearsals. The success of the first strike doctrine marked a milestone. Not in destruction, but in invisibility. The galaxy's dominant force had been breached repeatedly, and never identified the hand behind it. For the coalition, that proved one thing: readiness was achieved. Retaliation wasn't a question. It was a decision awaiting a trigger. Every attack was part of the same sentence, a silent declaration in progress. One the Empire couldn't read. Not yet. But soon, they would understand. Not through threats, not through warnings, but through the undeniable evidence that something forgotten had returned, and it had learned not only how to survive, but how to dominate without ever being seen. The age of evasion was over. The next phase would begin with visibility, on humanity's terms. The moment came when the coalition no longer needed to hide. The Empire's patterns were mapped, its blind spots exploited, its doctrines dissected. The simulations had ended. Execution began. The first reveal happened at Vesker Prime, an Imperial military stronghold orbiting a resource-rich gas giant. It was a symbol of control, housing fleets, command centers, and logistics hubs. The coalition didn't strike from the shadows. They arrived with a declaration: the presence of a human fleet, in formation, unmasked, undeniable. 36 warships exited void space in perfect synchronization. Each vessel bore no insignia, only black alloy hulls and adaptive shielding that distorted light. No hails were sent. The Empire responded with automatic targeting. Standard procedure. Within moments, the station's defenses engaged. The battle lasted less than an hour. Coalition ships moved in patterns the Empire couldn't track. Weaponry unknown to any existing catalog cut through shielding matrices. Singularity payloads pierced the armor of capital vessels. EMP clusters disabled command circuits. Imperial admirals realized too late that this was no insurgency. It was a military force designed explicitly to dismantle theirs. Every ship in the coalition fleet operated on a unified cognitive interface. Commands were not issued, they were perceived. Reaction time was eliminated. Strategy evolved mid-battle, directed by Valkyrie cores that adjusted vectors and firing solutions in real time. No communication delays. No command hierarchies to disrupt. Just a single will made up of thousands of minds, acting with precision beyond comprehension. The Empire's losses were absolute. Vesker Prime fell. Not bombarded, not vaporized, neutralized, dissected, and stripped. The Empire didn't just lose ships, it lost technological secrets, command archives, encryption keys. All extracted mid-conflict, during combat, while the station still fought to understand what it was facing. That battle was not isolated. It was a signal. Across the galaxy, enslaved and oppressed species tuned into a single untraceable broadcast. A single phrase repeated in thousands of dialects, known to every race once exposed to humanity. We are awake. The psychological effect rippled faster than the Empire's ships could travel. Fear took root. Not fear of attack, but of uncertainty. A threat returned from extinction, stronger, evolved, and angry. Empire intelligence attempted containment. Information suppression protocols were deployed. Access was restricted. Internal dissent punished. But leaks continued. Rumors turned into doctrine among subjugated worlds. The myth of humanity became prophecy. Coalition production escalated. New shipyards activated deep within brown dwarf systems. Fabrication lines constructed entirely by autonomous units ran without pause. No single location held all the pieces. Blueprints were distributed across quantum-locked fragments, each capable of self-assembly under Valkyrie's supervision. Resource streams were diversified. No bottlenecks. No weaknesses. Every new vessel was a product of cumulative evolution. Hulls became smarter, self-repairing, adapting to energy types mid-combat. Propulsion systems mimicked spatial drift, leaving no conventional trails. Targeting software operated at precognition levels, predicting enemy formations before visual confirmation. Armor was layered with reactive cells that hardened under kinetic impact. The human fleet became a moving enigma, an armada built not to conquer territory, but to redefine the balance of power. No colonies were claimed. No flags raised. Only enemy structures dismantled, fleets vaporized, archives captured. The Valkyrie AI designated a new operational phase, full-spectrum dominance. The objective was to neutralize every strategic node the Empire relied on without engaging in planetary-scale devastation. A show of force, not extermination. Precision, not chaos. This was not revenge. It was correction. Empire retaliation became desperate. Fleets were scrambled without coordination. Ambushes failed before being initiated. Decoys were ignored or dismantled within seconds. Every maneuver exposed the Empire further. The more they moved, the more predictable they became. In response, the Coalition unveiled its command platform, the Leviathan-class dreadnought, powered by dark matter fusion and capable of intersystem jumps without tunnel gates. It housed 6 Valkyrie cores, multiple fleet control nexuses, and weaponry banned by pre-Empire treaties. It didn't need escort. It created its own. The Leviathan appeared over the Arden Expanse, where 3 Empire fleets had regrouped. It delivered no warning, no opening demand. Within 10 minutes, the fleets ceased to exist. Not a single coalition ship was lost. Word spread through black markets, encrypted forums, even imperial whispers. The Empire's dominance was no longer uncontested. For the first time in millennia, its citizens realized their rulers could bleed. The message wasn't that humanity had returned. It was that humanity had transcended the rules. They didn't fight for territory, or tribute, or power. They fought for a future that no longer required permission. And the galaxy was learning what that truly meant. The final engagement began without ceremony. No declaration, no ultimatum. The Coalition had mapped every Empire route, decoded all military encryption, and charted every defense perimeter surrounding the throne world. The operation's objective was singular: dismantle the Empire's core command structure in one strike. No prolonged war. No incremental campaign. Just termination. 6 fleets converged from multiple systems, each timed to microsecond precision. There were no formation gaps, no wasted motion. Every ship moved in synchronized silence. The Empire's last line of defense, 9 armadas and 12 orbital platforms, stood ready, expecting conventional tactics. What followed rendered all simulations obsolete. The Leviathan did not arrive through known lanes. It breached reality via dark matter rupture, bypassing gravitational defenses entirely. Its opening salvo fractured planetary shielding within moments. Planetary defense nodes attempted to reboot. They never completed the process. Valkyrie-driven interference corrupted command signals, severing command chains across all battalions. Ground forces launched in a pattern no Empire strategist had considered. Not a siege, not occupation, just neutralization. Automated drop pods deployed precision strike teams, each designated to surgical objectives, disrupt power cores, disable comm arrays, erase AI regulatory units. There was no interest in civilians, no indiscriminate destruction. Every action was measured. Every target irreplaceable. The Emperor issued a system-wide broadcast, ordering all remaining forces to converge. His voice was calm, but the desperation laced through command protocols told the real story. Within hours, over 60% of Empire reserves had been drawn into the gravity well of the capital system. It was the exact trap the Coalition intended. As the fleets gathered, coordinated pulse bursts from distributed relays created a lattice of anti-warp zones. The Empire, now locked within its own fortress, had no exits. The Coalition didn't press forward immediately. They waited, allowing Empire forces to overextend. When the retaliation came, it was furious. Dozens of coordinated vectors, heavy ordnance barrages, wave assaults. The Coalition absorbed, adapted, recalibrated. Losses occurred, but none disrupted command structure. The Leviathan remained untouched. Empire weapons struggled to find impact. Firewalls adapted to targeting logic. Armor modulated against kinetic loads. AI countermeasures hijacked drones mid-combat. The Empire fought with power, the Coalition responded with mastery. Once critical mass of Empire forces was reached, the second phase activated. Pulse detonations across localized star matter rendered navigational systems inert. Tactical overlays collapsed. Internal data routing was jammed with false telemetry. In the span of 5 minutes, the Empire's coordination degraded into isolated skirmishes. Command lost oversight. Units fought blindly. The Coalition moved. Every strike dismantled infrastructure, severed fuel lines, detonated munition stockpiles. Entire capital ships were boarded, their data cores extracted before being atomized. The command citadel fell without external damage, it was internally overwritten. By the time the Emperor issued a ceasefire, it was already irrelevant. The systems listening to him were no longer his. There was no negotiation. No terms offered. The Empire had burned Earth without a word. Now, humanity replied in the same language. The Emperor's final order, emergency system purge, was denied by his own machines. He died not by attack, but by obsolescence. The Coalition didn't need to kill him. They simply deleted his authority. Control of the throne world passed not to a conqueror, but to silence. The Coalition disabled all offensive assets, decrypted archives, and extracted strategic knowledge across centuries. They didn't impose new laws, didn't claim territory. They withdrew. The aftermath was not chaos. It was awakening. Subjugated species found no occupation forces, only severed chains. Worlds long enslaved discovered their shackles had vanished. The Empire's structure, rooted in intimidation, had no successors. No ideology filled the void. The Coalition left nothing behind but the impossibility of reconstruction. Humanity made no further contact. No broadcasts, no ambassadors. Their purpose was complete. They had not fought for revenge or power. They fought to ensure no hand would rise against them again. Earth was not rebuilt. It remained untouched, preserved as a monument to the cost of complacency. In its orbit floated a single station, uninhabited, broadcasting one line in every known language, unceasing, immutable. We remember. So we act. Children across liberated worlds studied not the history of the Empire, but the silence that followed. They didn't fear humanity. They understood it, a force that had emerged not to rule, but to prove that survival, when forged by loss and purpose, becomes unstoppable. In every system, the same truth was acknowledged: humanity had returned, not to be seen, but to be known. And in that knowledge, the galaxy would never forget what it meant to try to destroy them.